Okay, so before I say anything else, I have a confession. Mostly everything in this video isn't mine. Why? Because that's not my camera, this isn't my table, and this isn't my house. What is mine, though, is what's in front of me right now, which is a board game that I designed over the period of about 3.5 years or so. And today, I'm going to show you how to play it. Greetings, welcome, I'm Jonah. Everybody who's watching is going to know that, by the way, but you know, in case you forgot, I'm Jonah, and this is the game. So here it is. Before I do anything else, there's a lot of stuff in front of me right here, so I think what I'll do is I'll cut to a later recorded version of me, and he's going to explain what all of this stuff is before I get to showing you the actual game and how to play it. So take it away, future me. You can insert the edit now. As you can see in front of us here is the season track. Moving up, we also have the abacus, which works along with the season track, as I will explain later. This helps to keep score and keep track of time in the game. Moving on, we have the game board. It's constructed using a set of different tiles of different types, and on top of them you can see there are those gray 2x2 Lego tiles. Those represent neutral villages. Moving on, we have the game cards. These game cards are laid out beside the board, and they all do different things that affect the game in different ways, as I will explain later on. Further, we have a bunch of game tokens here. So right now in the middle of the screen, we have what are called economy point tokens. Those ones with the little P's on them, those are economy points. Essentially just represent money. Those gray pieces in the center there, those are represent farms. And at the bottom here, we have food tokens. And I will discuss what all of these do, as I said, later on in the video. Moving on, we also have a reference card, a player reference card for combat. Players are going to be looking at this quite often to help them remember certain things that I will explain later. And finally, we have the individual player pieces. Starting from the left, moving to the right, we have 20 influence tokens, 5 troop tiles, 5 troop pieces. Next to those, we have 5 castle pieces, and finally, furthest on the right, we have the 5 village pieces. And every player will get a set of every one of these pieces in a color of their choice. So thank you, past me, for procrastinating on this and making me do it in the future. Thank you. Thank you, me from the future, for a review of all those components that come in the box. Well, I say box, but this game doesn't actually have a box, actually. This game has the luxury of a Ziploc bag. I could probably make a box for this, actually. Alright, anyway, sorry. Sorry. Let's talk about setting up. As with many games, there's a lot of different ways to set up feudalists. So the way I've set it up, I've just set it up in a way that's going to be easiest for me as I'm filming. So all the player pieces are right here. We have the money and the food here and the farms in the center. And all the unit pieces over here. The player aids and the season tracker is right next to the board. The one thing you want to keep consistent is the board and the cards, where those are placed. Keep those in the center, in reach of all players. Before you start, have all of the neutral village pieces put on a tile, or however many you're playing with. In this case, we're doing a 3-player setup, so we only use 9 neutral village pieces. And the cards are over here. You can't see all of them, but they're over there. That's pretty much it for setup. And make sure, oh yeah, obviously make sure the score tracker is, they're all put to 1, which I didn't do. I had them all at 10. Counting starts from 1, if you didn't know. Once the game is set up, you are ready to play. So ensuring that the season track marker is on spring, which is the flower, that's how you want to start the game. You get to determine who goes first. So whoever is most likely to be a lord in medieval times goes first. If not, the youngest player goes first. So I'm going to go, let's say blue goes first, all right? So maybe blue's the youngest player, or, you know, maybe they had a lot of peasants working under them in medieval times, or they would most likely do that. So they're just going to choose where to put their first village, their first army, and their first farm, and they're all going to go in the same region, or on the same tile. So let's say that blue picks this forest tile. So what he's going to do, he's going to take this neutral village, put it back near the neutral farms, just sort of with them, that's fine. You can pile them together. And then he's going to place in its place the village, his first one, his army that says, or his troop rather, that says number 1 on it, on its flag, and a farm. So those 3 go in that tile. I just burped. I am so sorry. So that's that. And these tiles mean different things, but we'll talk about that in a second. Yellow is up next. He's going to place in this mountain range. So he does the exact same thing. Village, troop saying number 1, farm. And finally, last but not least, red is going to place their village. I should say, there is a rule for placing villages, so because blue placed here, yellow or red cannot place their villages here. So you can't place your initial village when you're first starting out in a tile adjacent to another player. And I should say that diagonal does not count as an adjacent tile. That is not a tile that is considered adjacent, so he's fine. And in a similar fashion, red can go here, which is what he's going to do. He's going to go here. There's a hair on this troop piece. Sorry. And village, farm. Same thing. Everybody starts out with the same thing. Can I get rid of this hair for a second? I'm just... There you go. Got it. So that's what that looks like. Now, there's a problem here because blue and the other 2 have all placed their armies, or their troops rather, but they need somebody to lead it. They're going to come over here. So what they're going to do, they're going to come over here. And blue's going to look for a potential general, I guess you could say, to lead the army. So that's what these cards all represent. And each card gives its own ability in its own way to help improve the game. Maybe it gives more money, maybe something else. So he's going to look, and blue's going to decide what he likes. What does blue like? I'm just going to read here. Let's try this on for size. So he's going to look at Conrad of Kenmar to lead his first troop, his first group of soldiers. This little square here, we're going to do something with that in a minute, but that just represents, the symbol on it, I should say, represents what type of advantage this gives you. In this case, these little feet represent movement. This guy, Conrad, gives you a movement advantage. In this case, it says, Conrad's army may move into any friendly river tile without using action points. Conrad cannot work with Sarah. What does that mean? So this essentially means he gets to move for free into any river tile, but he can't work with Sarah, which essentially means he can't, blue, if he's going to take this, cannot also have an army that Sarah commands, because they don't like each other, apparently. And Sarah, it just so happens, by coincidence, is up there. That corner card there. And she can't work with Conrad. She's got her own ability, which we'll talk about later. So, how does he take control of this person to have him command? So what he's going to do, he's going to take one of his troop tiles, not his piece, but tile, and he's going to put that on the square. He's going to take the one that says number 1, because the piece on his flag says 1, remember, so he needs to take the matching number. And in order to show that he has ownership, he's going to place an influence marker. It's a bit dark, but it says to signify, rather, that he has ownership over that particular general. So now he has to decide what go. Oh well, I guess first. No, we'll do that now. After. Now he has to decide what will go into this army. So he can't just go willy-nilly. He has to really think about this and decide what he wants to go into this. So he has the choice between any of the 5 units, which I talked about before. So he can choose from swordsmen, archery, cavalry, pikemen, and well, he could build siege, but that's not really in his interest at the moment. So what he's gonna do, he's just gonna take. This doesn't really give a combat bonus like some of the other cards do. So he's gonna take a swordsman, cavalry, and an archer. Don't worry about what these guys do yet. Just know that's what he has to represent. So he puts them on these 3 circles here. And he puts these unit markers on there to represent. Those are the 3 types of troops he has in his army. The last thing we add are 3 food to represent that this army is fully supplied now with food. There you go. That army has 3 food. And I'm going to cut away now, because you might guess what has to happen next is the other 2 players have to do the exact same thing that blue just did. So I'll do that and we'll come back and I'll show you what they've picked. Okay, so they've made their choices now. The yellow player has decided he's going to take Samuel of Alvisca. That's this card here. I'll read that to you because I think it's a bit small on the camera. It says traversing mountainous tiles costs 2 action points instead of the usual 3. Samuel cannot work with Diana. So like the blue player, that provides a movement bonus. So he can move across mountains faster, in short. Now for the red player, I don't think I can zoom in anymore, but that's all right. This is an interesting choice, actually. They got Sarah of Elker, which I mentioned earlier. Her troop carries 4 food instead of 3, so Sarah cannot work with Conrad. You'll notice that you'll notice I put 4 food up above instead of 3, so she gets 1 extra, which could be quite useful. We'll see. We'll have to see. Oh, one more thing I forgot. So the thing I forgot was each player, because they place their first village, each village, when you first build it, will give you 3 economy points. So 3 there, 3 there, 3 there, 3 for each. And you don't get 3 every turn. It's just when you build it once, you get the 3, and then that's it. And then any subsequent villages you get after that will also give you 3. So everybody starts with 3 economy points. Another thing, everybody should also have 2 power. You get 1 power from villages and 1 from a troop. So everybody starts out with 2. Make sure all the players have 2 on here, with the 2 on the 10 side. And this green at the top, which represents the passage of time, should already have 1 bead on the 10 side as well, to indicate that 1 season has already and is passing. So just make sure that your score track looks like that. Okay, let's get to taking turns. So players take their turns in Feudalists by taking actions, and they take actions by spending action points. Now, action points are what allow players to move troops, build castles, take control of villages, and a bunch of other stuff I'm going to talk about. And some actions will cost more than others, and a player at the beginning of every turn will always have 5 action points. So the first kind of action is the simplest one, which is traversing, or we can just call it moving if you so choose. So it's just traversing is just when you take one of your troop pieces and move it out of one tile into another. Now, the cost of action points for this kind of action can vary because it depends what tile you're moving into. In the case of river tiles, like this one you can see here, so let's say blue wanted to move into this one, that would cost 2 action points. Now let's say he moves into that one. If red were to take their turn, and this won't be red's turn, but let's say they wanted to move into a forest, that also costs 2 action points. If, say, yellow were right here and wanted to move into this mountain tile, these gray ones, that costs 3 action points. So moving into mountains costs a bit more. However, if yellow were to move from the mountain tile into this plain tile you can see here, which is actually called a plains tile, and it has nothing on it, it's just grass. It represents grassland, I should say. That only costs 1 action point. So moving into a plains tile costs a lot less than moving into a mountainous tile. So that's traversing. Second kind of action you can take, which is what blue is going to do right now, is occupy. So that's just when you take either a neutral village or another player's village and take it off the board, which is what blue is doing right now, and replacing it with your own. Now remember, when blue does that, every village is worth 1 power. So going over to the score track, we give blue 1 power for doing so. Occupying will never cost more than 1 action point. But there is a case where a player may want to take a village of another color off the board and not occupy it. Or they may have to, I should say. So in this case, this would be a case where, let's say blue wants to take this neutral village, but he's occupied every other village on the board, or not every other village on the board. He's used up his 4 other village pieces plus this 5th one, and they're all out on the board. So just pretend all these 4 village pieces are on the board somewhere. Okay, so those are spent. But he wants to occupy this village. Now the problem is, if he takes this one off, he doesn't have any village pieces to put in its place because they're all on the board already. So what can he do in this case? Well, he actually has 2 options. The first thing he can do is raise the village. Now, if a player raises the village, the piece is removed from the board, and in its place, you put an influence token. Now, he won't get any money from that the village might have provided if he had occupied it, so he won't get any economy points for it, but he will get 1 power. So that still represents 1 power that the village would have given him otherwise. The other thing he can do, he can plunder the village. So the village does not become his, but it remains a village and gives him 3 economy points. And he would put those in his pile, or in his bank, I guess you could call it. And the thing about this one is it would not give him any power. So because he doesn't actually own it, he's only taken the money from it, he doesn't get any power. So that's just a case of where all of these village pieces are spent, and if you want to capture a 6th village or a 7th, if that happens somehow in the game, then you can either raise a village or plunder a village. Probably won't happen, but it can happen. So just keep that in mind. For now, using this example turn, we're just going to say that blue occupied this 1 village. When you move into a tile, you don't have to occupy a village. If you have action points left, you can choose to bypass it completely. It's up to you, but we're just going to say that in this example turn, blue has decided to first move into this tile, which is 2 action points, and then to occupy is 3 action points, and maybe he'll do something in a second. We'll see. We'll just get to describing the rest of the actions though. One thing I did neglect to mention also, when you build in a river tile, or when you get a village of your color in a river tile, you actually get 1 extra economy point. So this one actually gives you 4 as opposed to the usual 3. So that is worth 4 economy points, not 3. Moving on to the 3rd type of action you can take is building. And this always will cost 2 action points. Now, there are several different things you can build, or rather 3 things specifically. The first thing is a farm. Now, don't worry about these yet. Just know that it is something that you can build by spending 2 economy points, which are given to you by villages, as I've shown you earlier. The next thing you can build is a castle, which costs the same as a farm. Both farms and castles, please note, must be built on a tile that contains a village that you own. So if it doesn't have a village of your color on it, then you can't build there, unless you're building a village itself. And this would only happen if there's a village has been raised and there's nothing there. Then you would spend 3 action points to build a village and remove, no matter whose it is, remove that influence token that was previously there and replace it with a village of your color. And just be sure that if it was somebody else's influence token, say it was yellow here, just be sure to remove that and replace it with the village, and ensure that you're keeping track of power on your score track on my abacus over to the left here, which is out of view of the camera, but you would have to keep track of it on there in this case. So that's building. The next type of action you can take, the fourth type, is recruiting. And that's essentially the same as building, except you're just making a troop. Couldn't find the word somehow. I'm coming up with these terms myself for the past 3.5 years, and I can't remember my own terminology. It's when you build a troop. That also costs 2 action points and costs 2 economy points as well, as you can see on this building cost card. I should have shown you that earlier, actually. But you can build a troop, and when you do that, you would go over to the cards, which I'm going to be going over to in a second, and you would pick, as you saw me do earlier, pick another person to command one of your armies. Alternatively, you could influence instead of recruiting directly. So what is influencing? Well, I'll have to take you to the card section of the table, away from the board, to show you this. So let's say that the blue player wants to make a second troop, but he doesn't want to just make a second troop. He wants to go take it a step further. He wants to take away one of yellow's soldiers, one of yellow's troops. He can actually do this, both of these things, in the same action using the influence action. So what is the influence action? Well, remember how when everybody buys a troop, they place 1 influence marker under their army to show that they have control over that army. And you were asking, well, why not just show that one? Well, because of what blue can do right now. He can spend 2 economy points to add 1, 2 influence markers under that card. Now that he has more influence markers than yellow, yellow no longer has control over this army. Excuse me. And what blue will do is he'll take his second token, numbering 2, or whatever his lowest one is at any given moment, and he'll replace yellow's with that one that you see there now. That is now blue's army. So what does that mean for the map? Well, I'll show you. Well, I should explain first. Okay, so the cost of influencing varies. It just costs 1 economy point and 1 action point for every marker of influence you want to put on. So I put on 2, so it cost me 2 action points plus 2 economy points. If you wanted to put on 3, it would cost you 3 action points and 3 economy points, 4 of each. I think you get the idea. But what does this mean for the map? I digress. What does this mean for the map? Well, I'll take you back over and show you what happens. Now that yellow no longer has troop number 1, because he doesn't have a card beside the board that matches it, he can't keep this piece on the board. It's gone. And now that yellow has a 2 in its place, where that yellow one used to be, he can add one of his troops to the board anywhere where he has a village of his color. So he could add it to this tile or this tile. It doesn't matter. And you can have any amount of troops in one tile at any time. That's fine. So you could put it here. Let's say let's say he wants one in each, so we'll have him right here, and that's how influencing would work. Now, of course, next turn, yellow could also spend points and try and take his army back. The only thing about this is you have to have more influence tokens than your opponent under the card, not tied. So you always have to be one-upping each other if you want to fight over influence of a certain individual or a certain card. If you really want a certain power, you have to be willing to put up the money for it. It's sort of like a bidding war in that sense. Actually, that's exactly what it is. So that's influencing. The sixth and final action you can take in feudalists is simply called attacking, and it occurs when, as you can see here, two troop pieces of opposing sides are on the same tile, and one player, when it's their turn, simply chooses to attack another player. So what happens when one player chooses to attack another player? In this case, we can see the blue second troop is attacking the red first one. Well, once again, we're going to go over to the cards side of the table, and combat is going to be resolved there, not on the board. So I'll take you over there. Okay, so as you can see, we have the cards that correspond to the numbers of the troops that are on the board, as I just showed you. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to look at what kind of tile they're on. In this case, they're on a plains tile, which means there's no advantages that go to the attacker or to the defender, so they don't have to worry about that. In other cases, they will have to worry about it, but because they're fighting on a plains tile, they don't have to take that into consideration. The attacker will always decide first as to what happens. What happens in combat is the player whose turn it is to attack looks at the three troops that they have versus the three troops that the other player has, and they decide, or rather they look at where one unit is most likely to win. So this is a good time to consult the combat overview card, which shows which units, depending on their symbol or their type, have an advantage over another. So what does blue have in this case? Well, it has a ranged, and a pikeman. And the red has a swordsman, a cavalry, and a pikeman. So what can they actually do here? Well, blue sees that pikemen do well against cavalry. They have an advantage, which means that if they encounter in battle, the cavalry will lose. So he's going to say, pikeman attacks cavalry. Simple as that. And what happens when he says that? Well, we consult the chart and we see that it's probably blurry, but I can just tell you that the pikemen, as you can see, the pikemen have an advantage over when the pikemen encounter the cavalry. You trace the columns down on the table, and we see that it says pikeman victory, which means that the cavalry unit here is simply removed. It's gone from the game, and it won't come back unless it just won't come back, actually. But now it's the defender's turn, so the defender can choose what to get rid of from this side. So they do the same thing that blue does, look at where anything can most likely win, any given unit, and choose to attack with that. So they have what's left, a swordsman and a pikeman. So a swordsman and a pikeman. Well, pikeman can... Swordsman does pretty good against... Yeah, swordsman can win against pikemen. Oh, but what does range do? Yeah, ranged wins against swordsman. and against... Oh, ranged wins... Hang on. Ranged and pikemen actually have a stalemate. And so the swordsman can't win against any of these archers. So they're going to attack the pikemen. That's the best option for that. And then it's simply blue's turn again. So blue says, okay, I'll attack with arranged the swordsman. And this process repeats until... So we see that the pikeman does against the ranged. And actually, oddly enough, blue is left with no choice but to lose this encounter on the field, because all that's left is a ranged against a pikeman, and a pikeman wins in that case. Oh, do they? Oh no, it's a stalemate. So they both lose. Oops. So that's interesting, because what happens is that gets taken off, that gets taken off. They go back to their respective players. Influence tokens similarly go back to their respective players, including anyone else who had influence tokens but wasn't controlling them. So that yellow token went back to the yellow player. And because these were both defeated, they are gone from the game. And we will never see them again until the game restarts. Because when you die, you die. I don't know if you knew that, but yeah, it's kind of a long-lasting thing. And what you do, you take from this discard pile, which I showed you, or not the discard pile, but this untouched face-down pile of cards, and you simply take from the top of the deck and replace those missing spots. So now there are new people off the line for you to, or for them to take command of your troops. And as you can imagine, when we go back to the board, the troops are removed and returned to their respective players. So it's as simple as that. And those are all the actions that you can take in Feudalists. I almost forgot the name of the game. Wow. Just a few other things regarding combat before I close. So, if you're having a battle in a... the easiest one is the river, because the river actually only provides an economic bonus. It doesn't provide this works the same as the plains, the river, so you don't need to worry about that. But as I said before, when you're looking at combat, you look at what tile you're in at first. So in the case of, say, this one where they're in the mountains, whoever's attacking is actually at a disadvantage, because during combat the strength of all the defending units, all the units in the defending troop, goes up by 1. So, for example, swordsmen would normally win against pikemen. But in the case of this, if there's a pikeman in here, it would actually stalemate with a swordsman because it has that defensive bonus. In a similar fashion, forest units, as you can see on the edge here, provide a +1 to the attacker. So again, using that swordsman winning against pikeman example, if blue was attacking in a forest with a pikeman, if he was attacking a swordsman with a pikeman, instead of, normally he would lose that pikeman, because that's a terrible way to that's a terrible thing to attack a swordsman with. But with the attack bonus, it's actually a stalemate. So you can, depending on where you're combating another player, you can turn a potential loss into a potential win or a potential stalemate, which can really get you out of a pickle sometimes. So those are some extra things to do with combat. Just be aware of where your troops are on the map. Alright, let's talk about food. I talked previously about how to build farms and get them onto the map. I did not talk about what they do. As you can imagine, they have to do with the food that we saw above the cards to the right of the table here. So in the same way that villages produce economy points, farms produce food. So how does this work? Well, so as you can see in this example here, there's a troop who's in a tile with a village, and he's next to a tile that has a village and a farm in it. But there's no farm in this tile. If he ends his turn with the troop in this tile and not in this one, this troop will lose food. Why? Because although he's in a tile that although he's in a tile that he owns with a village that he owns, there's no farm in this tile. If he would want to replenish his food, he would have to be in this tile. If there's no farm in the tile with a village that you own, you're not going to get food. So let's say the troop was over here. There is a farm in that tile, but the village doesn't belong to him, and that won't supply him food either. So what happens when a troop isn't supplied food at the end of the turn, or isn't in a farm, in a tile with a farm that he owns at the end of a turn? Once again, we're going to go over to the right of the table, and I'll show you what happens and what effects this has on the troop. So as you just saw, the troop with number 1 just ended their turn outside of any tile of a farm with a farm that they own. So because of that, they're going to lose at the end of this turn 1 food. And that's regardless of how many units. So if he had lost, say, 1 or 2 units in this battle, he'll lose 1 food every turn no matter what. Now let's say that he has lost all of his food. He hasn't been near a farm in a while, and so he hasn't been replenished. And we'll talk about replenishing in a minute. What happens then? Well, he's going to start losing units because he can no longer supply all of them. Starting from the right and going to the left, you will take off 1 unit every turn until either that unit is eliminated or until the troop gets back into a tile with a farm that belongs to them. So what farms will actually do is, let's say a troop moved into a tile with a farm that they own, and they have less than the maximum amount of food that they're allowed. So let's say, I don't know, he's got 1 food. At the end of the next turn, instead of losing 1 food, 1 food will be added. For every time that they end a turn in a tile with a farm that they own, 1 food token will be added above there. So farms are essentially supply centers for your troops, and it's going to make it possible for them to move around. Now this segues into the importance of seasons. So I'm going to take you over to the season track to show you the significance of that, and then I'll bring you back here to show you how it affects food. Every time that a round of feudalists is finished, in other words, every time play passes around the table, so in our case, blue plays, then yellow plays, then red plays. Once it's blue's turn again, this season track moves along. So we take the season marker, and it is now summer. What happens again? We move to autumn. It happens again, we move to winter. These 3 seasons, nothing really changes. Everything works the same in the game. The farms will produce the same amount of food, everything stays the same. Winter is the one you have to worry about. Once winter hits, food will no longer be produced by farms, regardless of whether your troops are in those tiles or not. So you're going to lose food on winter turns. It's an inevitability. What that means is, well, it means a whole lot of trouble, because if you haven't replenished your troops by the time winter hits, you're going to start losing units, and that's very costly, because you can't buy units back. You have to build up a whole nother troop to get more units. And it's really as simple as that. The only other thing you need to know about seasons is that once 10 full seasons have been completed, so I should actually show you on the abacus here. Every time a season is completed, this moves once. So you move one bead over to the 10 side, and that means once all 10 seasons are done, the game is over. So once you complete 10 seasons, or 2.5 years, the game will end, and whoever has the most points by that point wins. Alternatively, whoever wins is whoever gets 10 power first. So if you see anything like this, that signifies the game would end. Although I think that's more realistic. Getting 10 power on your first season is pretty impossible. So that's what seasons mean. All it means is it affects food during the winter, and it can also determine when the game will end. It's a constant thing that's happening in the game. And going through the rules here, that's pretty much it. Oh wait, no it's not. Hang on. Castles. Let's say yellow has no troops but a castle in this particular region, in this particular tile. And let's say blue moves here. Now, blue normally, without a castle there, would be able to take this village immediately, assuming they started here and moved to there. But with a castle there, the village cannot be taken until the castle is destroyed. And in the same fashion, a troop cannot be attacked. A troop of the color belonging to the color of the castle in that tile cannot be attacked until the castle is destroyed. So this is a way essentially for you to protect both your buildings and your people in them. So how would you destroy a castle? I should cover this as well. Well, it's fairly simple. Castles have on their own have a +2 defense, and which means you're going to have to take 2 people, use 2 units to take them down, and that's assuming there's nothing garrisoned in the castle, which I can talk about in a little bit. But so easy enough. If you only have a 1 unit in your troop, you're not going to be able to remove this castle. But let's say you have a full troop and you're able to remove the castle. Now that the castle is destroyed, you cannot, on your same turn, at least with this troop, you cannot now take the village. You have to wait until your next turn. So you see how that works. So I've destroyed this castle, but I only have 1 troop in this tile. I cannot take this village. I could come along, if I had another troop, I could come along with this troop and now take the village. But I can't do it with the same troop. One thing that our troops can do is they can garrison into castles that they own. When that happens, the rules of combat change. ranged units gain a +1 attack bonus when they're occupying a castle. So they can actually, this troop can actually attack from the, because it's in the same tile. So as the rule follows, if you're in the same tile, you can attack. But when that happens, regardless of what region they're in, ranged units will gain a +1 attack bonus when they're occupying a castle. Siege units, which is something I've sort of been glossing over, but these siege units actually have a +1 attack bonus against castles. So this is where the siege units really come into play, because you can use them to sort of crack down the walls of any castle that might be in the way of a village you want to take. Okay, so that basically is how you play feudalists. I hope most of it made sense. If some of it was confusing, but if you understood it at even a little bit, that's a win in my book. I don't know. My teaching abilities are probably not up to par when it comes to board games. I am planning to do a example game video maybe sometime in the future. Hopefully on a table that is owned by me in a house that I am more familiar with. Camera angles were weird to set up in this video. But anyway, and maybe, who knows, you might actually see another human being in one of my videos. But there's no telling what can happen, you know? Until then, thank you for watching.